how do we try and make narrative practice relevant to situations of profound hardship? And I've had a lot of very interesting jobs in the field of narrative practice, but for a while there, my job was actually, as a staff writer, to go and interview people and write up their work when they might not have written it up. It might be great work, and bring it back to the field of narrative practice. Didn't have to be narrative therapy related, but congruent, trying to think what interesting projects are happening. So there was some fantastic work in relation to homelessness happening in Brazil. And this was the time of a particular social movement called the Movimento Sem Terra, a movement of landless people who were marching throughout Brazil and trying to change Brazil, which is, like most countries, the very few people at the top own a huge majority of the land. Anyway, in the midst of this broader social movement, and I want to talk a bit about social movements in this morning also. In the midst of this social movement, there were these great projects with people who were unhoused or unsheltered in big cities, forming unions, organising themselves, living under the big aqueducts, not seeking to live in conventional homes, but claiming a space for themselves, claiming a life for themselves. And we were there documenting this, and then much of this work was inspired by a particular philosophy by Paulo Freire. He was a Brazilian educator, so he wasn't a therapist, he wasn't even necessarily a community worker. He was an educator, a teacher, passionate about teaching. But he was more than that. He was passionate about transforming his field, the field of education, because he realized that actually education in Brazil just maintained the status quo, that those who were already rich came into education, got even richer because they got an education that fitted for them and moved ahead. And he realized that education was not most relevant to the most marginalized in Brazil. And he thought that a task of any profession, he actually just spoke about education, so I shouldn't say he would say that for any profession. I would say that the task for any profession, and therefore also a task for counselling or community work, should be those two questions. Is our work relevant to the most marginalised? If not, what do we have to do to make it relevant to the most marginalised? And secondly, are we making broader changes more likely, or are we making them less likely? Are we just replicating the status quo? And I'll come back to that. That's a theme I want to come back to in this session. Anyway, he was determined to transform education in those two realms. And so his work had inspired lots of these projects. And he's very, very famous in his field. He wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's like in some way, it sparked calls to transform education internationally, and particularly with the oppressed in different places. So he's like, to me, he was like, oh, he's very, very, very famous. So Cheryl, of course, says, well, why don't we interview Paulo Freire while we're in Brazil? I'm like, we can't interview Paulo. It's like, I don't know who your equivalent would be, but it's like interviewing someone very significant. Cheryl says, look, we're Australians. Sometimes when you're traveling other places, say we're from Australia, you never know, he might say yes. So believe it or not, we called him up. Well, Cheryl said I had to call him up. This was a long time ago. So I called him up and said, could we possibly interview you? And to my great surprise, he said, yes, please come to my house on Sunday. So I was like, oh my goodness me, we're going to have a chance to interview Paulo Freire. So we got there, and there's many things that happened in this small interaction. We had to take our suitcases because it was going to be on our way home. So we got there, and when we got into the room and saw him, he said, "Do you speak Portuguese?" Very clear about the politics of language. And of course we had to say, no, we don't speak Portuguese, but his niece said, "But you speak very good English, don't you?" to Paulo Freire. So I didn't know quite what was going on, but then he proceeded just to speak in Portuguese for the next 25 minutes to clearly make the point that if we were coming to his country to learn about these matters, surely we should be at least engaged with the local language and speaking some Portuguese. This meant I didn't get a chance to ask permission to turn on a tape recorder. And I didn't think this was the sort of person you would just put your tape recorder on without asking. So I knew that much, so I didn't do that. So at one point he then stopped speaking in Portuguese. He was speaking to our colleague, Walter Veranda, and started speaking in English. And he started speaking about some of his principles of his philosophies about pedagogy of the oppressed, and it was fantastic. So I was just taking notes on my piece of paper. I had the beginning of, I had short dreadlocks, shorts and boots, Doc Marten boots. The reason I mention this is Cheryl always adds these details. She thinks these are important details. Just to give you a sense, it was a long time ago. I looked slightly less conservative, only slightly less conservative than I do now. Anyway, I was madly taking the notes. And then there was a pause. And so now was my chance to ask a question. So I asked a question that I thought was okay. I don't know if you've ever asked a question you think's okay. And then you realise, okay, that's not a good question. Anyway, I asked a question. I said, so these principles you're talking about, how would they be relevant for work with the homeless? So that was my question. What would you rate that question? Anyone give that a mark? Anyway, I thought it was okay. At this point, Paulo Freire becomes very animated. He says that question represents all that is wrong with those in the privileged world. That question represents neoliberal fatalism. I'm like, I don't even know what neoliberal fatalism is. I'm still madly writing this down on my notepad though. He said, how could I answer that question? Do I look like someone who could answer that question? We were in his home, mind you, surrounded by his books. He said, the only people who could answer that question are people without homes. I cannot answer that question. And yet people with privilege, they will look for the answers in the wrong places. So I'll be asking Paulo Freire the answer to that question. Then you don't get the answer, and then you feel hopeless and give up on broader social change. That's what he meant by neoliberal fatalism, asking the wrong people for the wrong questions and then giving up on broader social change. So there was a slight irony here because I was madly writing down, do not seek prescriptive answers, I was just writing this down. And it was a fantastic challenge. I actually didn't get to ask another question because he then went on in that spirit for quite some time. So we left from his house to the airport. I flew back to Canberra. I was living in Canberra because I had a crisis really that had made me leave, a relationship crisis, so I left Sydney. I've always known despair about the broader world, but that was a pretty rough time for me, and despair was lurking more closely. And I woke up with jet lag in the middle of the night and then thought I may as well write up my notes. So I wrote up my notes from Paulo Freire, and I looked back at his books and I started weaving this into a piece. And then I went back to sleep, and then I woke up, and when I woke up, I was woken to the radio, and it was a news story saying that Paulo Freire had died. So this had been his last interview. I could understand this story in different ways. I could think I killed Paulo Freire with my bad question. I choose not to take that interpretation because I do know he had been very significantly unwell for some time. I take it a different way, that someone even close to the end of their life, in significant physical struggles, has the opportunity to meet with somebody from another land to talk about issues in relation to hardship, chooses to invite them into their home, when asked a question, fires up with the most incredible clarity about this philosophy of no, don't look for the answers or the responses in these wrong places. Don't give up on the chances of broader change. And it's such a powerful challenge. And in my own personal life, which is not the important part of this story, certainly my relationship to despair changed, because now I always have his voice in my head thinking, if I'm feeling despairing, who should and where should we be turning to ask about who would know about these realms? But that philosophy of really thinking about to whom are we turning, who will have the knowledge about this, and how can our work not give up on the chances of contributing to broader social change and be relevant to the most marginalised. They're the things that remain with me from that story, and that's why I'm sharing them with you now. So what does this mean in our practice? This determination. And there's a broader challenge that I just have to mention this. So that first challenge was from Paulo Freire, but there's another challenge that specifically challenges the field of therapy and counselling, which of course is where narrative therapy emerges from family therapy. And family therapy itself came out of a bit of a challenge. They were trying to think, let's not just meet with individuals, let's meet with families, a broader context. It in itself was quite a departure from individualized therapy. But there is a strong tradition of challenging the therapeutic and counselling realm, which I think is a great critique and one that we don't need to be defensive about. We can actually think we need to engage with this. And this book is just one of the many challenges to therapeutic realms, but it's a fantastic one. So Celia Kitzinger and Rachel Perkins are lesbian feminists, and they write compellingly about how they think the rise of therapy and counselling actually co-opted and got in the way of feminist revolution or women's liberation revolution. I don't think they use the word revolution. So anyway, but to broader changes. And it is very challenging. And when Cheryl suggested lots of people read this, lots of people liked it in the field, and some therapists got a little bit defensive, but actually many did not. And I think it's a ripper. You'll see some of it in the reading for the Masters, but it's not just from feminist realms who have posed these challenges for decades. It's also stacks of other social movements who have said, wait a minute, if people have grappling with a problem and they go and just seek a personal solution in therapy, this is not going to change any of the broader conditions that people are struggling with. So actually, as counsellors or therapists, we can become part of the problem. We're just patching people up to go back into the mainstream world. So there are stacks of people who raise these sorts of challenges and critiques. And I really like this quote. I heard this at Highlander Folk School. Highlander Folk School is a great place. It's now called some more fancy name like Highlander Research and Education Centre. But for most of its life, it's been known as Highlander Folk School. It's in Tennessee. And it's a place where African American and white Americans would meet. One of the few places where they would meet when this was, when segregation was at its peak, and they would train and think about how to change social conditions. Like Paulo Freire in Brazil, it's come out of the field of education. This were also in the field of popular education. It's a wonderful field. Now, I really like Pancho's phrase here. If it doesn't start personal, it doesn't start. So yes, it's got to be about personal experience. It's not some detached realm. But if it ends personal, then it ends. There's no broader contribution to social changes. So this is quite a challenge to the field of therapy and counselling, of which I include myself. I've chosen to be in this field because I think they are magical, wonderful ideas. But I think these challenges are really relevant. And one way of therefore paralleling that quote from Pancho is to think, yes, the key phrase, the person is not the problem is the problem. This anti-pathologizing politic of narrative practice, which I love, can sometimes just do with an extra little phrase, and the solution is not only personal, which has, I'm not saying this is new actually, throughout the history of narrative therapy, therapy and community work have not been separated. But we can just have different emphases, and we can be noticing in our own practice, are we tending only to personal solution? Or anyway, there's lots of things we can consider and that we can question and challenge ourselves about, I think. But crucially, what can this look like in practice? So I want to just share a story. Kathy, thank you so much. You make me a very happy man, Kathy. So I don't do much work. I can't even speak English anymore. I don't do a lot of work with individuals. So I'm going to share an old story, because most of my work is with groups or communities. But I know many of you receive stories of individual suffering. And that's different than Paulo Freire's challenge. Our challenge is to respond to suffering. That's what people are often coming to us for. So it's not just a matter of, contributing to a social movement. I do want us to have that opportunity, but we have to respond to suffering if people are coming to us with stories of suffering. So how do we grapple with these complexities in those contexts where it's an individual who is coming to see us? So because I don't have many of those stories, I'm going to share an older one, but it's the story where I learnt a huge amount from. The other reason I want to share it is I'm still in touch with the person who's at the center of this story. In fact, I spoke to him just this week from a prison here in South Australia, and I'll be able to tell him that I'm still revisiting his story because there were things about it that were very significant to me. Might be relevant to you. I hope not. I hope there will be some relevance. But I'm not going to tell the whole story because you can read about it. It's the first chapter of Collective Narrative Practice. So you'll be able to read about the details and the background. But from this work, there were some principles that became visible to me that now I carry forth and that came from this story. And I want to convey those principles. And here they are. I'm going to name them out front and then I'm going to come back to them again. During this these meetings with Peter. Peter's his real name. He's happy for me to use his real name. In the book, he's called Paul, but his real name is Peter. I realized at some point that although Peter was coming to me with his personal issues, personal experiences, he was representing his own experiences of profound abuse as a kid, actually, profound sexual abuse when he was in a children's home. That was why I was meeting with him, because he was going to testify to a commission about this childhood injustice. I realized that, yes, I was meeting with him about his personal experiences, but actually he wasn't just representing himself. And this was a bit of a breakthrough for me. I realized when he talks to me, he's not just representing himself, he's also representing a social issue. In this case, he was representing the experience of people who've been subjected to children's homes, which were pretty horrible institutions in Australia in the time that he grew up, and also people who were subjected to abuse and sexual abuse as kids in these homes. So that changed something for me, and I'll tell you where that happened, whereabouts in the conversations. But from now on, I try to think, even if I'm meeting with an individual, I can listen for how are they representing their own personal experience. That's crucial. But what social issue are they also representing? Because that then means I have different responsibilities. One way of noticing if people are representing something broader than themselves is by listening very, very carefully to their speech. Because here in Australia at least, and of course I only speak English, you know that far too well already by now, people rarely only speak in the first person. They often use other words like, the times when we, or anyway, I'll share this, or they speak in you, that's what you do in these situations. That's what you do. It's not saying I. It's actually a link to a collective experience. And I'll come back to this. But we can really listen to people's speech patterns and think, are they only talking about themselves personally, individually here? Or are they already, in their speech pattern, making a link to other people around this social issue? And if we do that, we can follow their speech pattern, which means we're not imposing our collective agenda. We're just following them and seeing where this leads. So I'll try and make that clearer. Thirdly, if people are representing personal experience and a social issue, then how can we enable them to make some contribution in relation to the social issue? And in my mind, I use this phrase, contributing to social movement, not as in a big social movement, but some contribution to addressing the social issue, whatever it is. Because I think our biggest challenge in the field, any field that's related to psychology, counselling, therapy, is how can we not hinder broader social movement? Because that's the critique, that actually we'll receive the stories of suffering, we'll just create a personal solution, no broader change will happen. So we've got to just, we don't have to make a revolution, but we do need, I think, to not hinder broader social changes. And the last principle, which I've already talked about in this teaching block, is that therefore we can enable people to speak through us, not just to us, as a part of this process. So these are the principles I want to try and draw out. And this is the first time I've ever mentioned them at the front of before the story. I'll also mention them a little later. I think I'll just keep going for a bit so you get to see how these play out, and then we'll hear what these might mean in your contexts. I'll just look in the chat here. Okay, so This is a really complex story, and I can't convey all its complexities in this one session. So if there are any parts that you feel uncomfortable about, or politically disagree with me on, or any of those things, I will welcome hearing from you. I'm not fragile in relation to this topic, and it is complex, and usually I would spend more time articulating those complexities. What I will just say is that the broader political context for this presentation fits within a number of different social movements that I think collective narrative practice is linked to. One is trying to address violence, personal violence, sexual abuse, physical abuse. That's one. There's a whole social movement trying to address that. Absolutely wonderful social movements. How I come to be in narrative practice, I wanted to respond to the craziness of men, masculinity. Obviously this has been led by women in different communities, and particularly feminist movements. Another realm that I'm not going to talk in huge detail about is that Dalit Centre has been very committed to questioning prisons for a very long time. So this is a prison-related story as well, and there are lots of complexities there. We have Mimi Kim coming on day 10 to meet with us, and she really is one of the key people in the world as a woman of colour, feminist, determined to address issues of violence against women and also question prisons. So I'm sort of putting some of those really important realms, just mentioning them here, and we can talk more about them on Friday. But what this means is that when there was this commission of inquiry about children's homes and sexual abuse in children's homes, I pressured the commission to go into prisons. So they consulted with Dalit Centre about this, how to hold a commission that wouldn't re-traumatise people. It's a different topic, very interesting one. In those consultations, I said, if you really want to hear about what happened in children's homes, you have to go into prisons. That's where so many survivors of children's homes now live, particularly survivors of sexual violence in children's homes. So they, unlike most commissions, they went into prisons. Then someone from prison wanted to testify, and that's when they came back to me. They said, we can't find anyone who will support this person for various complex reasons, but mainly because he had done real harm in his adult life. Sexual violence to adults, to adult women. So this person I'm talking about was in a children's home throughout his childhood, was brutalised in this children's home in a completely unjust way. He should never have been in a children's home in the first place. And his whole life then was lived through institutions. He's been convicted of these crimes. He is now in prison. And I was asked to support him, to testify. I was only going to be able to have 5 meetings with him because access to prisons is complex. I told you there's rather complex and a rather big story. So many complexities were at play in doing this work, including whether we should even do it. And the decision was made that I would do this work. The decision was made by the women of Dalit Centre. So someone asked earlier in the week about how do we grapple with the politics as a therapist? How do we keep the politics alive in our therapy? Well, my response to that would be, you're going to have collective processes to do that, because there'll be things that we as any individual will not see. So for this story of practice, I had to form a collective, a non-like-minded team who would give me feedback, and they would be direct. It wasn't just like a cuddly, feely, yes, you're doing a really good job team. It was people who would also critique what I was doing. And Cheryl White, in order to decide whether this work would happen, she called a meeting of the women of Dulwich Centre, including the administration staff, and said, should we be working with a man who's done considerable harm to women? Is this where we want to be putting our work? And they decided I should do the work. So these are collective processes of gender accountability. And the Just Therapy team in Aotearoa, New Zealand, they really were the ones who talked about these partnerships, not just on gender, often on culture. So if you have people, they have Maori, Pacific Islander and Pakeha white team, and they form partnerships so that the white fellas need to be listening to the collective of Maori folks if the issue is in relation to Maori matters. Anyway, big topic. But it was decided that I would do this work. And therefore, I had to think, how would I do it? How would it be of value to Peter? But how would I also grapple with some of those broader issues? So that's the context that I then went into the prisons. How many of you do work within prisons, or not just work? How many of you care deeply about prisons and the lives of people in prison? Because often these issues affect our families and loved ones and friends, as well as just work matters. So, okay, so I saw that someone wanted to have an interest group in relation to prisons too, so hopefully we can keep talking about that. Okay, so I really loathe prisons, and I can't believe that they are so taken for granted still in a land that has only had them for 200 and, my maths is not good, 230 odd years, anyway, too long. Too long. The shirt that Bob is wearing in terms of this Another Day in the Colony, it's another day in the colony where prisons are taken for granted. And one day, let us hope that they won't be, that we will learn from First Nations communities who never had prisons. Okay, that's another big topic. I went in to meet with Peter. I don't know why I'm talking so much about my hair today, but at this stage I had long dreadlocks, very long dreadlocks down below my waist. And I didn't know if that was going to help or hinder make a connection with Peter. Often they would help, because at least I didn't just look quite as ordinary and boring as I do now. And it would help make connections. But I was going to be needing to build a bridge across very different worlds. Peter, who had lived his entire life almost since the age of 8 since the age of 9 in institutions. Me, who's lived an incredibly privileged life. I met him in the first meeting and I really struggled. I'm not used to working one-on-one. When I asked him direct sort of questions, it didn't really work, it seemed to me. He didn't have very many words. If you've lived your life in institutions, you learn not to talk about your life or anything that you hold precious. Pretty much key rule is keep what you hold precious close to yourself. Why would he be saying these things to me? So, but he did say a few things, and I asked his permission if I could take notes, and he was happy for me to do that. I offered to send him a letter afterwards, and he said that'd be all right, but he wasn't that much interested in reading, because he had to read stuff for his court case, and reading clearly was not something that brought him joy or ease. So I had this conversation. By the end of the conversation, I felt a little bit despairing myself, a little bit like, oh, I don't know if I've covered much territory. So I called the team and I took them out to dinner. Do any of you have teams that you need to take out to dinner when you have a particularly difficult crisis? I find inviting people to dinner works well if you need to have a tough conversation. So The restaurant no longer exists. Such a long time ago that this restaurant no longer exists, but we went there. I had drafted a letter to send to Peter in the meantime, and I read it out. On this team, it was a pretty good team. I get to have some pretty good teams. It was Cheryl White, Michael White, and Nancy Gray, who is a woman who works with men who have been violent to their partners. So that was the team. I read out the letter to Cheryl, and I'd included some questions that I wish I'd asked Peter. And when I read this out to Cheryl, she said, "Can I just get this straight? Did Peter say he wasn't that much interested in reading?" And I said, "Yes, that's right." And she said, "So you've written him a letter?" And I said, "Yep." And am I right?" Cheryl said, when you asked him direct questions, that didn't really work. Is that right?" And I said, "Yes." And then she said, "So you've asked him more direct questions in your letter. Is that right?" I said, "Yep." If you've got any people who give you good feedback like this, it's important to get direct feedback, not just you're doing a very good job. Direct feedback. Then Cheryl said, "Why don't you stop pretending to be something you're not?" Is that good advice? I thought that was quite good advice. She knew I'm not a therapist. Why are you trying to be a therapist and ask these direct questions? Why don't you do something you're good at? Do you have enough material to write him a song? So I thought, well, that was not what I was expecting. But when Cheryl said this, I realized if I thought differently, and I thought not as a therapist did we get through all the questions and answers, but I thought, was enough conveyed in this conversation to be a song? Then I realized I had enough, at least for one song, if not a EP. Anyway, there was a lot of rich material that I could write. Now, Cheryl, at the beginning, had questions about whether we wanted to put energy into a man who had done such harm to women. She actually did not know, because this was going to be a big issue, this whole inquiry. But she was the one who said, when Peter conveyed to you that he'd experienced abuse as a kid in this children's home, how did you acknowledge that? Did something go back to him? If he has put that out into the world after so many years of silence, what went back to him? Did you find a way to acknowledge that experience? And I had to say, not really. And it was a complex situation because it's a hyper-masculine context. When he conveyed that they'd done things to him that they didn't want him to do, that was his expression, I couldn't suddenly say, "Oh, how did that make you feel?" or "That must have felt terrible." It's the context of masculinity makes that pretty difficult to know how to respond. But Cheryl said, if you didn't find a way to respond to him, if the world did not respond back to him when he has spoken for the first time about these issues, you have to go back tomorrow. So she might have had some queries about whether we should be involved, but if we're involved and he's spoken, then he needs a significant response. So she said, you need to write that song and get back in there tomorrow morning. So I did. The second meeting happened the day after the first meeting, and I'll just play you the song so you get a sense of this. And then I'm going to go back to those principles I mentioned before, because they start to play out in where this work goes. So I'll just play you the song first.
Locked up in a boy's home, and 40 years on, looking back now, don't know how that kid survived, was just life at 9. just had to adapt, just had to cope, find ways to get by in the institution. They did things to him he did not want to do. He knew it was wrong, he knew it then. When he was 9 years old, 9 years young, first locked up in a boy's home. 40 years on, and looking back now, I don't know how that kid survived. Was just life at 9. He knew he had to keep it quiet, make sure his parents did not know. But 40 years on, it's time for speaking. He knows. 9 years old, 9 years young, when first locked up in a boy's home. And 40 years on, and looking back now, I don't know how that kid survived. Was just life at 9. Just had to adapt, had to cope, find ways to get by in the institution. They did things to him he did not want to do. He knew it was wrong, he knew it then. When he was 9 years old, 9 years young, first locked up in a boy's home. He knew he had to keep it quiet, make sure his parents did not know. But 40 years on, it's time for speaking. This he knows.
So it's a pretty powerful song, isn't it? Because it was so strange that after I left that meeting with Peter, I really thought he hadn't said very much. I thought I'd sort of failed to ask enough questions in the right way for him to have spoken enough in the first person for it to be a successful counselling session. It's a little bit like what Tiffany was saying earlier today. Like I had all these ideas about what I should have done there, but actually when Cheryl said, could you write a song, I realised he'd conveyed so much, hadn't he? There's so much that he conveyed in these words. These are all his words, except one. There's just one word there that he didn't say. Any ideas what word that might have been? And I know it's quite a powerful piece, so those of you who don't want to immediately be thinking about this, you can just have a quiet moment. Amanda, what word do you think? He may well not have, you know. He might have said, don't know how that kid survived, and I might have put the I in there. So you may well be right about that. Wasn't what I was thinking of, but there's a good chance that you're right. I might have to, from now on when I present this, I might need to say there are two words that he didn't say. So, but he might have But he might have said, I don't know how that kid survived. I can't quite remember. But most of his speech was not in the I. I would agree with you there. Any ideas, any other word he might not have said? Beck. Yeah, you're right, Beck. Yeah, so why do you think I added that word? Why do you think I was influential there? So something about the power relations and responsibility of that being 9, that I might have been thinking about that. Yeah, you're quite right, Beck. What happened actually is when Cheryl then said, you know, could you write a song? I suddenly then listened back differently. Now, I don't know if any of you are songwriters, but you don't need to be. You might have some other aspect of your life that would make you listen through that, I was going to say lens, but it's the wrong metaphor. Listen through that sphere, something differently. So when I had to write a song, I had to think, what would the chorus be? What would the, you know, most resonant theme be? What would the emblem be of that conversation? And when I listened back in my mind, I realized he'd said 9. I was 9 years old, or more than once. He didn't say anything with much emotion, visible emotion, but I realized he'd said 9 years old more than once, and I thought in memory he'd given it more emphasis than other phrases. So there was something about 9 years old, and I thought that that extra emphasis or that repetition might really have been saying 9 years young, because 9 years is not old to suddenly be in a children's home and have your whole life irrevocably changed. So just want to pause just for a moment, because I know again that this is a powerful song. Maybe we'll just take a breath. How about we just take a breath? We'll go quiet breath, thinking of all those, including people in this Zoom room who know about, you know, what it's like to be small kids and in shocking scenarios, and to survive them, and to one day perhaps speak about them. Okay, so once I had written that song and recorded it, which that same recording you heard, a really simple recording, I then wanted to do something else before I went to see Peter. So any ideas what I would have done before I went to see Peter? I knew I had to go and see him quickly. I knew I somehow hadn't offered back an acknowledging, resonant response to him. I needed to. But what did I do before I went back? Any ideas? This is not like the quiz. There are no wrong answers here. So I could have done with any of you on a team with ideas about what could we do? What could we do? Julia, I think I'm pretty sure you were just scratching your head, but if that was more than scratching your head, I'd be very happy to hear from you. Anyone we haven't heard much from, got an idea about what else could be possible once I'd written this song? Janaki? I did, Janaki. I did indeed. So who do you, not to follow up a question with a question, who might also be able to respond to Peter? And actually in this situation, I thought they could respond to Peter's song. So I now had something that I thought could be quite resonant for other people, and that I could share this song with them and they could respond to Peter. That's exactly what I thought. Any ideas, Janaki? Who or what sort of person who I'd be looking for as a possible respondent, a possible outsider witness? So I actually generated 2 responses. I'm only going to share one of them. And I knew someone through my other work of interviewing people, someone called Leonie Sheedy. Leonie Sheedy has since this time become a national figure. She was not a national figure in those days here in Australia, but she had been through children's homes herself and had formed an organisation of people who'd been through children's homes. It was called Care Leavers of Australia Network. So I thought I could play this to Leonie because she would not only be a personal connection, but also some link to a collective of people who'd been through children's homes and experienced various abuses. So I also shared it with someone I'd interviewed who'd survived assault in juvenile justice, who I knew here in Adelaide. But this was Leonie's message. So I just called Leonie on the phone. She doesn't live in Adelaide, so I had to call her. And I said, I've got this song. I explained the whole situation and I asked if she would like to respond. She didn't want to, well, I didn't give her the choice actually. I know that she speaks really powerfully and that I would do the writing. I wouldn't expect her to write something. This is what she responded. Please tell Paul, because that's who I was referring him to then, that the words of this song reduced me to tears. This is the first time we've heard the words boys home in a song. Please thank him for his words, for the courage to say these words. His words took me back. It's like he's spoken these words for all of us. We've had no acknowledgement, and his words in this song, they're like an acknowledgement of what we went through. They're powerful words. We can feel the loneliness in some of the words. We went through that too. I can relate to that. Please thank him for his words. And can you ask him, would he be happy to for us to put up his song on our website? We'd like to share it with other members, other people who've been through similar things. Also, please tell him that he has a family here at Clan of like-minded people, of people who know what he endured. If there's any way we can be there for him, we will be. We'd like to be a place where he could talk with people who understand these experiences. That is a pretty powerful outsider witness response, isn't it? Anything in particular that you think is significant about what is being acknowledged here in these words? There is a lot going on in this one outsider witness message. That first part, I don't have language to describe that sort of acknowledgement, because it's an acknowledgement of his experience, but it's also actually saying your words have been acknowledgement for all of us. That's like a double or triple acknowledgement or something, isn't it? And as you mentioned, the loneliness, it's also a double-storied acknowledgement. It's not just focusing on, it's naming the loneliness. So it's multi-textured, but something about saying your words are an acknowledgement of what we went through. I don't have a language for that. There's something really significant in terms of collective narrative practice in that. The other thing that surprised me here, if I'd had to say which was the most significant words in the song, if someone had asked me that, what do you reckon the most significant words are in this song? I would not have said boys' home, because I didn't grow up in a children's home. But Leonie, who grew up in children's homes, she says this is the first time we've heard the words boys' home in a song. This is why working out who's going to be the outsider witnesses is kind of crucial, because only people with that lived experience could name that in the way that Leonie has. Anyway, there's so much. We could talk the whole session just on what is acknowledged, what storylines are acknowledged in that document. But we won't, because this is just really one part of this story. So I went back in to meet with Peter. I brought the song, I brought Leonie's words, I brought this other person's words. I played these to him. When I got stuck, which I did after I read things out, because Peter still didn't have too many words, he then asked to hear the song again, and I felt so relieved. Sometimes you feel very relieved when you're meeting with people. It was a really significant meeting, And then Peter did just start to talk. He found his voice to talk about different histories, both of other abuses and other histories of resistance. And it was a very, very significant second meeting. Unfortunately, it was so significant that I thought from now on this is going to be easy. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I didn't call the team. I didn't have another dinner with them. I didn't prepare for the third meeting. I just thought this is going to be no worries. We can do this now. Now, I don't know if any of you have been that foolish, but it therefore didn't go so well, the third meeting. And I just want to share with you about that and then come back to those principles that I mentioned at the beginning, because this is where I also learnt a great deal about those principles. I took a little while then before I went back to see Peter the third meeting. And when I got to see him, it wasn't like the second meeting. I hadn't brought anything in particular. It's one of the things I really learnt. Sometimes not just expecting the conversation will flow and bringing something to spark off can be significant. But for all sorts of different reasons, he was a bit, I don't know, grumpy or a bit not that happy with how things were going with the tribunal. Didn't seem that happy with me. And I just kept trying to ask him various questions to try, because I thought I had all this second storyline that I could build on now. There's contributions that he'd been making, there other things he talked about in the second meeting. I was coming up with every question I could try to come up with. And after about, I think I did this for at least 35 minutes. Do any of you ever, if it's not working, just to keep doing the same thing? It's not a good idea, but I did just keep doing that for a considerable period of time until Peter then said, "What's with all these questions?" And at that point, I don't know what crept in. It required remarkable perception. I realised that perhaps I wasn't going in the right direction. So, in relation to what's with all these questions, I want you just to go into groups for a moment or two and think, what option might you take at this point? This third meeting is suddenly trying to ask about these things, but it's not going well. He says, "What's with all these questions?" I'll give you just 3 minutes in your small groups to think, what might you suggest to me that I could have done at this point in this meeting with Peter? I did something a bit like that. I went maybe one step further and I apologised. So I just said, "Oh, Peter, yeah, I'm so sorry. I've been asking you a lot of questions. I'm really sorry. I won't ask you anymore," or something like that. And apology is important, isn't it? It's good to be able to just acknowledge when we're off track. So I apologised for all the questions. And then this was the moment, it's why I'm sharing this part of the story, is this is when I realised I'd only been asking him questions about his personal experience at this point. I was trying to get him to speak about his personal experience. I was inviting him, with questions that he might speak in the I voice as a response, and it really wasn't working. It had taken me so long to realise that. So it was in this moment that I thought, well, wait a minute. If Peter's having some struggles in testifying to the commission, if Peter's having some struggles trying to talk about sexual abuse when you're in prison, I mean, he won't be alone, will he? I mean, it's an incredibly horrible scenario. You're grappling with these earlier histories and you're in prison and you're trying to talk about them. That is really complicated. So if I thought, okay, if he's not just speaking about personal experience, how about I think about what broader social issue he's representing? And how about I make it possible for him to contribute something to that? So I said something like, after the apology, "Peter, I reckon you are the first person I know of who's trying to talk about experiences of sexual abuse while in prison, who's trying to testify to this commission. So do you think we could create something that might be sent to other people. I guess they're also having these struggles. If you're having these struggles, I guess they will too. What do you reckon? And at this point, Peter just went, that's a great idea. I think he partly felt just so relieved that I was not going to just be asking him the same sort of questions. Actually, I didn't stop asking questions at this point, but they are a different sort of question, because I could be asking, what do you want to say to other people who might be testifying? Why is that important, do you think? I could ask him questions that were not hard for him to answer, and they were not zeroing in on his personal experience, and they weren't just expecting him to speak in the first person. So in the last 15 minutes or something of this session, suddenly we were on fire. It was like, oh my goodness, shall I take the notes? And it's like, yeah, you take the notes. He didn't want to write. And okay, what do we say? And I'd come up with the title, and we created together, because I was also influential, a letter that could be sent to other people trying to talk about these issues. And it was, compared to the first part of this session, which was like miserable for both of us, this was a little bit exhilarating. And I'm going to share the letter with you because it's the best example I have of what I was talking about in terms of speech patterns. It's got really multiple speech patterns going on here, and I've highlighted some of the different pronouns. A letter to others in prisons who are starting to talk about experiences of childhood abuse, sexual abuse. It's not an easy thing to start talking about experiences of sexual abuse when you are in prison. It doesn't start off in the first person. It's a matter of opening up and not being concerned with feeling embarrassed or ashamed. I've found it best just to talk about things matter-of-factly. I'm doing this so that people can have a better understanding of what some of us boys went through. This is the first time I heard this really clear articulation of why he was doing this. Because I could ask him, so why are you doing this? It's a broader purpose, isn't it? So that people can have a better understanding of what some of us boys went through. I'm also hoping it will help me to understand why I went on to do certain things as an adult. I want to fix up my life. You can read that yourself. And he says here, I reckon it's a lot harder to keep things in than let them out. So if we want something for our lives, we've got to not worry when others form opinions of us. It's been important to me not to worry about what the other person thinks. In my experience, most people who are in positions to help tend to be sympathetic. I reckon this is all about taking a chance. When we start talking about these things, we're taking a chance. We've got no idea of the response we will get, and the biggest issue is trust. You've got to trust the person you are talking to. I thought this was pretty interesting. I didn't know why things hadn't gone that well in this session necessarily, and I certainly wasn't going to introduce the concept of trust or anything like that. That would have felt very strange. But when Peter is now speaking to others in a similar position, he says the biggest issue is trust. We've got to trust the person you're talking to. So then I can ask him, so how do you deal with this? And he says, at the same time, I try not to build it up because it might just be a job to them. They may care, but they might also move on and leave you behind. I've had to come to terms with this. The first times it happened, I felt really let down. We developed trust and then the person packed up. But I've come to terms with this now. I've accepted that this is life. It doesn't mean they don't care. It just means they've got lives too. Actually quite poignant, isn't it? When you do start talking about things you went through as a kid, you might start to feel emotional. This is something to deal with. For me, it was like I'd blocked this all off behind a brick wall. As I start to take the brick wall down a bit, then the emotions come with it. Sometimes these days, when I think of what I went through as a 9-year-old kid, I start to get really teary. I feel sorry for what that kid went through. I also feel ashamed of some of the things I've done. I'll just mention actually at this point, I forgot to say that when he heard his song and the 9 years old, 9 years young part, he said That's the first time people have understood about being only 9. He confirmed that that was the a crucial theme. So he mentions again here as a 9-year-old kid. Then he comes up with some quite profound philosophies of life here. Still, you've got to take the chance. It's like everything else in life. If you want love and affection, you've got to take a chance. You can't just shut the other person out to stop yourself from getting hurt. If you're afraid to let anyone get close to you, then you can never have a relationship. Talking about the things that we went through when we were kids, it's like having a relationship with your own life, with your own history. When you do open up your history, there are emotional times, but it's worth it. It means we can have a relationship with our own life. To me, the contrast between the first 35 minutes of the conversation, where nothing was happening of any value, and this last 15 minutes when Peter was able to articulate these quite profound philosophies that have actually made real contributions to other survivors, because this document was then quite widely shared, is so stark. That's why I really wanted to share it again, even though it's an old story, with you today, because it just, to me, you might see something else in it. To me, and I'd be very interested if you see different principles, but to me, these principles that I mentioned at the beginning come forth. If I thought Peter was only representing his personal experience, and I only asked him direct questions about that, I got nowhere. But if I followed his speech patterns, and weren't they diverse, his speech patterns in that letter? And I find that so interesting. I've only written about this in one place, and I just never got around to thinking about it more. If any of you start following speech patterns in your respective languages, I would be so interested to hear from you, whether they're similar, different, if they can guide us to not just focus on individual personal experience, but also these links to the experiences of others. When I did this, I could enable Peter to make some contribution, whether it was through the song or through this document. We made other documents too, but this was the one I wanted to share. And hopefully this in some way contributed to this broader social movement of people who've, these two broader social movements really sparked by First Nations folks in relation to the stolen generation, bringing light to that profound injustice, then created space also for non-Aboriginal people in the Forgotten Australians to have a voice and have a social movement. So hopefully this provided just small, nothing grand, but some further sparks and linkages of people around that. And that happened through enabling people to speak through me, not just to me. And it made my job so much easier. Apart from anything else, that shouldn't be the most important consideration. But sitting there in the prison, the isolating nature of imprisonment and prisons, the idea that it wasn't going to be just me trying to do everything in this conversation with Peter, it was me being able to link him to those who joined with him in spirit in these social movements, made my job so much easier. So that was what I wanted to share with you today. And to me, these relate directly to Paulo Freire's challenge, and also the challenge of feminists and other practitioners who are trying to say, how do we not reduce the possibilities for social change? How do we not receive a story of social suffering and only go to individual or personal solution?